Welcome to True Crime and Wine. And in this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Lewis Hutchinson, a serial killer who lured his unwitting travelers to his castle-like estate just to kill them for sport. I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this guy would convince travelers to come to his estate for wine and entertainment, but then shoot them, strangle them, or even stab them with a saber.
Yeah, John, we're going back to the 1700s here. So mention of saber. And who would not want to enjoy a nice glass of wine, some company, and a castle, John? So I'm sure luring victims was not very difficult for him.
Yeah, and this is a crime that we've really seen repeated throughout history. It's amazing how many different serial killers have entertained their guest before killing him. So, like you said, Brady, we're going to do something a little bit different today because the information on this killer is limited. The crimes took place back in the 1770s in colonial Jamaica. And so I thought, let's mix it up a little bit. We're going to mix up the story a little bit, skip over some of the profiling details, but then use the tools that we have to kind of dive in to the story that's just really interesting and really fascinating. And, you know, I have people as I'm traveling around the country and folks are at the True Crime and Wine shows, and they ask me all the time, well, how long have serial killers existed? Or was Jack the Ripper the very first serial killer? Well, my answer is always, we've had serial killers as long as we've had people. And today's story really illustrates that because this serial killer not only predated America, but he predates Jack the Ripper, one of the most infamous serial killers, by over 100 years. So, Brandy, let's get into the story of Lewis Hutchinson.
All right, John. So we are starting in colonial Jamaica. This is 1770s. This is a British sugar plantation society, which is dominated by slaves. The population is about 210,000, of which, John, 192,000 were slaves and just over 4,000 whites in this community on the plantation. So the island's economy centered really on the export-oriented agriculture owned by the few people that we're going to talk about. And they were made up of Scottish immigrants, including physicians, businessmen. They were also comprised about 1/3 of the white population, John. So you have, if we're picturing this in our head, you've got 192,000 slaves, 4,000 whites. So you have physicians, businessmen running colonial Jamaica at the time, right?
Yeah, and totally outnumbered by the number of slaves that are working on the plantation. I mean, this is an entire island built on agriculture and primarily the exportation of the sugar from the island. So that kind of paints a little bit of a picture. We're on Jamaica, 1700s, dominated by plantations, owned by a very few people, and really run. Everything done on the island is done by the enslaved peoples. The legal system at that time was derived from British common law. As you would imagine, Jamaica was a British colony, and the law was enforced by constables like they had in Great Britain and small groups of militia, military members of the British Army, basically stationed on the island. Now, this is really interesting, and I love, we love doing interesting serial killer cases, but when it's wrapped up in history like this, I find it even more attractive. So during this time, the white on white crime was taken very seriously, because it would basically be plantation owner on plantation owner or family on family. And the government didn't want that. They wanted the plantations to run, to be smooth, to everything be peaceful. So if there was white on white crime, it was taken very seriously. But the slave violence, the floggings, the mutilations, even the executions were basically routinely overlooked. They weren't a big deal. So the colonial government really didn't take notice of that, and that was the vast majority of the population. Now, Lewis Hutchinson, being a white plantation owner, his crimes were taken very seriously, and the colonial government responded very quickly with very swift justice. So you see this dichotomy. Very few people on the island that have wealth, rich white people run the plantations. Any crime among them is extremely serious. All other crimes basically fall through the cracks. So kind of a different setting for us. Let's learn a little bit about who Lewis Hutchinson is.
Yeah, so Lewis is actually one of those Scottish immigrants we talked about that came to Jamaica. It's notorious as the island's first documented serial killer, like you mentioned. Murdered numerous travelers, guests, passerbys. I'd like to kind of know, John, what you know about the dichotomy of the Edinburgh Castle, where he was living, how he was able to lure. We're going to get into that. But this is in the Pedro district of St. Anne Parish. So Lewis was actually convicted of one murder, but suspected in over 40 to 50 over a 12-year period. So 1770 to about 1770, beginning of 1773. So 20 skulls, John, are actually found buried on his property, and clothing, jewelry, watches, approximately 43 watches were discovered on the property. So, and fun fact, Edinburgh Castle still exists and is preserved as a historical site. But John, he collected things. He was burying skulls right on his property. So comfort zone is the castle?
Yeah, and so we can really go back in history and profile some of these killers, and that's what we're going to do today. The castle wasn't just his comfort zone, it was his sanctuary, it was his hunting ground. It was built specifically to kill. He built the castle from scratch when he bought the land with defensive towers that he could look out and using a rifle pick off people coming on the property. So this really is an amazing story, a fascinating story. Why was he only convicted of one murder and not the 40 or 50 that we now know he committed? Well, it was pretty easy. They convicted him of it and killed him real quick. So we'll get into that story.
So we talked about profiling, and we always look at the early life. Again, this is 1700s. There's not a lot of back history on maybe his childhood. I would like to kind of talk about maybe where he got his wealth, or where you think he got his wealth. But we know he was born in Scotland in 1733, and now he stated that he actually studied medicine, but that has not been able to be verified. Unknown family information, as we mentioned. And again, where did he get all of this money to build this sanctuary, this castle of his? And then he did immigrate in 1760 to Jamaica. So we don't know too much about him, John.
Yeah, we know he was 27 when he emigrated. But one of the things that I find fascinating, and we saw this with a lot of immigrants, they would reach a new country and no one knew their background. So they could kind of be whoever they wanted to be. It's almost like popping up on the internet today and building a Facebook profile. Nobody knows who you are. You can be whoever you want to be. This really fits kind of that narcissistic personality that we see in serial killers. He posed as a doctor to try to get business and wealth and money and everything else. Where did it, but he wasn't a doctor. We found no records in Scotland of him ever attending the university to be a doctor. No graduation records, anything like that. So I'm kind of leaning towards, as we profile his early life here, he lied about being a doctor. If he lied about being a doctor, what else did he lie about? Because there weren't any records of a wealthy family by that name moving to Jamaica, or any part of the family moving to Jamaica, which means if he lied about his credentials and being a doctor, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the
Right.
serial killer that I caught, he lied about being a teacher and he forged his own diploma to get a
That's
job.
right.
Why wouldn't this guy lie about his wealth? And if he's lying about this, this is already leading me down the path. This guy is charming. He's manipulative. He's good looking. He's probably a con man. Maybe that's where he acquired his wealth to
Mm-hmm.
come to Jamaica, buy a plantation, and build a castle. So I can already start pulling from other serial killer cases,
Uh-huh.
building a little bit of back profile on this guy without a whole lot of documentation.
Well, like you said, most of the immigrants were coming, to gain wealth through the sugar production and the plantation ownership. And even though, is this again posing as a doctor? And I think to myself, what kind of doctor was he posing if this guy was actually doing this? What kind of doctor was he posing at? Where was he getting his patients? I mean, lots of questions. And like you said, when you're immigrating to a country in your 1700s, you can kind of show up as anyone and be anyone.
Right.
So really, really interesting here.
But isn't that the same thing we tell our kids? Right. I got wrangled into helping out on a case this weekend and with sexual predators and stuff like that. And one of the things that we talked about was this individual went online, created his own persona as a young teenager in order to exchange photos, information, meet other young teenagers. So we see this today. It's just a different version of it. It's an electronic version. You go on there and you create your profile. You can be, and I think he came to Jamaica. He created himself, made himself a doctor, and it's kind of verified because the only records that exist are of him doing very routine medicine. Something that he could have picked up in any book, anywhere. He's not like doing surgical procedures and killing people or anything like that. So again, he does just enough to cover his disguise, you might say, and to earn people's trust. And then he shows up with all this money to buy a plantation and build a castle. I'm going back to that theory, like I just said. Young guy, good looking, charming, kind of sophisticated, presents himself well, poses as a doctor, probably con people, and that's where he got his wealth. But that's kind of the background that we can put together on this.
So let's talk about the castle for a little bit, because you said some of it was built for certain things. There was, where the guard stones were built so he can see, and as you said, he was shooting and he would target people coming onto the property. So I'm trying to picture it in my head. So we've got a castle. This is in St. Anne's Parish. Now, it was acquired for a sugar plantation and cattle operation. So was he actually doing work in this castle, John? Was he
So he
producing,
actually built the castle. So he acquired the land for
Right.
a sugar plantation and cattle operation. He was running cattle. The slaves were running the cattle. I think he owned about 24 slaves. They also worked on the
Okay.
sugar plantation, picking the cane, grinding it, producing it, all the things
Mhm.
that needed to be done. But he also builds this castle. And the castle is very reminiscent of castles in Scotland. It was a two-story structure. It had a square layout. And the fascinating thing was he wasn't stopping at the castle-like structure. It had two circular towers positioned at diagonally opposite corners, and each had loopholes. Those holes when you look at a castle, Brandy?
Oh,
Those
yeah.
holes are so the guards or the defenders can see
Yeah.
out and then fire down below. So he actually had not only the castle, but the towers with the loopholes built in it. And the castle was built just for his purposes, we think, of killing. In the center of the castle was a great room for entertaining. but it also made it in the center of the castle, and you had to get out of the castle and cross the property and get past the guard towers before you could even get out. So this entire thing was constructed as basically a killing castle. And more than that, the land that he acquired was on the most popular north-south travel route on the island, meaning he knew that travelers, soldiers, fishermen, doctors, slaves, everybody would be traveling that north-south route, and that's where he built his castle.
Oh my God. So I'm thinking like a 1700s Hunger Games. And
Yeah.
I think of like the structure, like building something to where one, they can't escape. Two, they can't get anywhere in the castle without him probably seeing them. So there really is no way out. I mean, my God. And then talk about organized, John. We haven't even talked about his crimes yet. Look at the organization of even doing this,
Yeah.
right? Preparation for this.
Yeah, and the planning that went into it is phenomenal. Picking out the piece of property right there on that main north-south corridor, building the defensive towers, making sure that you had loopholes throughout the defensive towers. And that was specifically, I mean, they weren't under attack. Right? You're not talking about he built a castle on a piece of land that was under attack from another country. So why would he have the towers? Why would he put the loopholes in? Well, it was specifically so he could shoot down into and out of the castle grounds. Like I said, he had that large room for entertaining. There were stocks on the castle property that he did use for slaves, and he used for some of his victims. And I don't know if this is coincidental. I don't know if he planned it. I don't know if he scouted it when he looked at the property. But right next to his property, like adjacent to it, was a huge sinkhole. Now, you don't think that you would build near a sinkhole on an island. And let me tell you how big this sinkhole was. We actually have a small one out back of the winery. We've got it's not big, but it's sitting on top of an aquifer. And every once in a while, the land kind of gives way because of the aquifer underneath. And all. So you're sitting on an island here, and he's got a sinkhole. The sinkhole is over 300 feet deep. 300 feet deep on this island. What do you think he's going to use the sinkhole for, Brandy?
Disposing of trash in his own mind, which is bodies, John. Bodies.
Exactly. Can you believe it?
Wow.
I mean,
300 feet deep.
You're exactly right when you said a minute ago, hey, we talk about organization with some of these serial killers, and we talk about their planning and their preparation. How many rise to this level?
I mean, every decision he's making, John, and what he's doing is going to be around what he eventually is going to do, which is murder people. But I mean, it's like he is literally just sitting here building castles and then designing it and molding it to where nobody could ever probably leave and escape. And it's a game to him. The game.
It is.
We talked about the game.
He created a game. And I found this really interesting. So I was reading through some statements, unbelievably, yes, some exist from the 1700s, of some of the slaves. And they talked about how neat the property was and how neat the hedgerows were. And I think the investigator who I was talking to him at the time said, wow, he really kept it neat and clean and disposed of the bodies in the sinkhole. And they go, oh no, the hedges were trimmed so neatly to give him a clear shot out of the tower. So it forced people to run on the paths between the hedges, you'd see an opening, right? And that's where you're going
Yeah.
to run. That's where you'd run. Well, he knew you were going to do that, and it gave him a clean shot. You talk
Wow.
about planning.
Wow.
This may be one of the most meticulously planned serial killers that I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Okay, so you mentioned he owned slaves. You mentioned he worked in the cattle operation, worked on building the castle. He's going to use a sinkhole to dispose of the body. So now the preparation. I think people can kind of get an idea in their head of what this now looks like. But what are we picking up from a profiling perspective before we kind of jump into his crimes, besides just the meticulous planning of the castle?
Yeah, it's really hard because there's so little documentation on his early life in Scotland, any crimes he may have committed. So with the information that I gathered, again, I'm leaning towards a serial killer, that we know he's 27 when he goes to Jamaica. We know his killing spree lasts about 12 years. So that's going to put him into his 30s mostly, and even up to 40, I think. But what I'm taking is a narcissistic individual that is charming, that has a great personality, apparently had a really vibrant red hair to him.
Okay.
And somebody that probably came from a background of being a con man, because of what we see, the deception of him going to Jamaica and being a doctor and everything, and how he acquired his wealth. Now, where do I get that, Brandy? Am I just pulling that out of my butt? I mean, no.
Yeah.
This is coming from other serial killers that we've studied hundreds of years after this guy, and we learn, wow, they are great con men. Some of them have gotten pretty good wealth, and I go back to the second episode we did, A Cup of Murder with Leonarda, a con artist since her earliest days on this earth, because she was born in abject poverty, and that's how she learned to survive. She acquired substantial money and substantial property, and all of her victims came to her in the soap shop she designed.
I know.
So I see tremendous similarities here, and that's how I can kind of go back and say, this is what I would draw from it. The inferences in the research would point to he was handsome. He was, well built, probably above average intelligence, charismatic. Certainly the MO from his killings, which we're going to get into, no empathy, very narcissistic. And again, we don't know anything about his back history or petty crimes, but it's pretty easy, I would say, for this guy, if we look at other serial killers throughout history, to kind of project backwards and go, wow, we can actually see this, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned, though, the lack of information when it came to being a physician, right? Actually ever studying medicine, and then where he got his wealth from, and then being the con artist. And so, John, do we have any record that he actually just came from Scotland? I know he's only 27 years old, but we also know that when if indeed he was raised in poverty, if he was a con man his entire life, when did that start? Or do we even know if he came directly from Scotland? Was he traveling and committing other crimes as a con man? I mean, I think about those things. Was this had he been preparing for this, right?
Well, obviously, in the 1770s, you don't just pick up and leave, whether it's Scotland or Great Britain or anywhere in Europe, and take off on a transatlantic voyage, is what it was, to the island of Jamaica. Can you imagine how risky that is?
I know.
And the inherent dangers of just that transatlantic voyage. But now mix into it he had to have some money to do it. He had to
That's
pay
right.
for the voyage. He had to have money when he got there. And if he was able to buy the sugar plantation and cattle operation and then build a castle, I'd say it was pretty substantial money. So I'm
Absolutely.
really leaning towards this guy being a lifelong con man, a sociopath, somebody that created wealth, but instead of investing it, instead of using his talents for good, right? I mean, we see this
Yeah.
all the time, and intelligence and everything else. He wanted power. He wanted control. He wanted to be in charge of everything. Probably knew he couldn't do it where he was because he didn't come from a noble family or a family of status or anything like that. So he
Mhm.
was going to invent it in a brand new place in Jamaica. Now, as you know, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, it wouldn't be True Crime and Wine without the wine. Yes, I know I drink it throughout the show, but we always feature a special wine, and we're going to talk about the fifth wine in our investigation series. That's that series where we're partnering with Wine Shop at Home and True Crime and Wine to deliver 6 different wines to you in a series called The Investigation. Now, the fifth wine, the one we're going to discuss today, is called Basically a Detective. And I've seen so many of you all over the country wearing the t-shirts, Basically a Detective, and the pins and stuff like that. Well, that's what we're calling this wine. And it's a sweet red wine that has floral notes and a fairly high alcohol content coming in at about 13.7%. Of course, since it is a sweet wine, you're going to want to chill this wine, and it's going to pair well, exceptionally well, let me tell you, with dark chocolate. I love it, sitting with some dark chocolate and sweet red wine, especially one of those evenings that maybe you're listening to a true crime story like this podcast or one of your favorite TV shows, and things are kind of heating up in the show, and you know that you're basically a detective. You're figuring it out. Well, one thing you're going to figure out is if you enjoy our Basically the Detective sweet red wine through the investigation series, you're going to be very happy watching the show, drinking the wine, of course, listening to our podcast. Just works out perfectly. So our wine of the week this week is Basically a Detective, a sweet red wine that we bring you as part of our investigation series. And of course, you can purchase that. The information is in the link in the bio for the podcast and in all of the links for our social media. And if I haven't mentioned it yet, $1 from each bottle purchase goes to the DNA Dope Project. It's a 501c3 dedicated to helping law enforcement name unidentified remains using investigative genetic genealogy. We've talked about that on our show and how it's so important to solve so many cold cases. So check the link in the bio or in the social media and purchase your wines in our investigation series today.
Okay, John, so let's go ahead and start talking about some of his victims and the information that we do have on these crimes. So victim A is an unnamed young white man. He actually befriended this young man, helped him get better, aided in his actual recovery, and then shot him from the tower as he left the castle.
Yeah, again, a fascinating story here. He finds this traveler that is sick traveling along the main highway. He invites him in. Well, we know that he invited many people in for entertainment, gave them wine, dinner, that type thing before killing him. This young man, he discovered, was ill, and he actually helped nurse him back to health. And the way that we pick up on this stuff is we heard that this was over a period of weeks.
Okay.
So this is a long convalescence, right? This
Yeah.
is not just, oh, Brandy's got a stomach ache, we'll let her get better and send her on her way. He actually took the time and resources to get this young man back to health so that when he bid him farewell and the man was leaving down those hedgerows out of the castle, back going wherever he was going, Hutchinson goes up to the tower and shoots him with a rifle through one of the loopholes and kills him.
John, it just reminds me of like the God complex, like saving someone, helping, knowing that you've been a part of them getting better, but then knowing that you have the power to take them right out.
Right. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
No, I think you've got it right on the head there. And whether that certainly doesn't apply to all of his murders, but that has got to be part of his MO, right? Part of the killer's MO, part of his way of thinking is, oh, look at this guy. What if I am the hero and I make him better and I give him food and I give him drink and I fix his wounds and all that? Because in the end, I know that everything I gave him, I can take away, and I can take it away in one shot from the tower. This is just, again, I chose this case because I thought it was fascinating, but there's so many little intriguing nuggets embedded in the case because he has so many different styles of murder. And you've got to think that all of it is centered on his need for power, his need for control, maybe playing God, like you said. Really different.
Okay, so we talked about how he would invite people into the castle, entertain them, feed them. As most of the victims were leaving, he would shoot them from the tower. Let's talk about victim B for a second. Timothy Cronin. I'm going to go back to him. He was a schoolmaster. He was actually strangled while in the stocks. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what stocks are so our listeners can kind of envision this.
Yeah, the stocks are the pillory. I'm doing this for our YouTube watchers, putting my hands and head out like I'm in. Yeah, where you get in the pillory, the stocks where you're locked in there. You've got the wooden piece below you. Your arms are locked in. Your head is locked in. You can't go anywhere. They used that when they were whipping slaves. They used that to torture people, and all the rest. And Timothy Cronin, who, as you said, was a teacher. He was a school teacher, and he was passing by, traveling down the road, and he was invited in. Like so many of the other guests. Oh, look, hey, traveler, you look tired, you look weary. I've got this castle, I'm well off. Come in here, let me entertain you. They'd feed him, they'd give him drink. But with Cronin, he placed him in the stocks before strangling him. Now, that's pretty fascinating in itself, right? Inviting somebody in, feeding him, spending the evening with him, putting him in the stocks, and then strangling him, totally different than shooting him. But the most fascinating part of this murder is that he had some accomplices. Matter of fact, there were two that were identified, and we're going to get to those later. But one of his accomplices was there along with his wife, the accomplice's wife, and other people. So he committed this murder in front of numerous dinner guests.
And then he was okay. We're going to have to, okay. So now we talk, accomplices. How many times have we talked about accomplices and to serial killers, getting them to go along with what they're doing?
Yep.
We don't know if it's by force. We don't know if there's promise. I mean, this guy lives in a castle and is feeding people, giving them wine. I mean, who knows? Maybe some of these accomplices have never seen a dime in their pocket, right? We don't know. So maybe it's the luxury of what they're, of being fed, right, from this guy. But gosh, it's hard to get away with this kind of thing right by yourself, but now you have other people helping you do this. John, what do we know about the accomplices?
Well, we're going to get into that in a minute because we're going to talk about them at the very end when we talk about sentencing. But the thing that I find fascinating, okay, like you said, we've talked to serial killers that have accomplices for whatever reason. They promise them sex, they promise them money, they promise them drugs, a place to stay, food on the table. Doesn't matter. Okay, I can see that. This crime was different because it's the first one documented that we know that in addition to the two accomplices that Hutchinson used to help kill the victims, their wives and girlfriends and other people were there too. Can you imagine? So I'm looking at this as, you know how we see on the news, it seems like every week now, some famous star who had a party, who was committing crimes, whether it be sex or drugs or human trafficking or crimes with children or whatever. And there's all these people that know about it. These people that know about it. They see what's going on at the party, but they want to be attached with or associated with the individual. That's the only thing I can think of. Was this a 1770s party atmosphere like that, where these people wanted to be with somebody rich, somebody that had food, somebody that had wine, somebody that was making money on the plantation, somebody that was entertaining travelers, and murder just became, I'll look the other way.
Like a game. I felt like a dinner and murder things that people attend and pay to, or pay, like Clue, who did it? That's what I'm picturing, is a room full of people, almost like a game. Like, this is acceptable, and he is rich and powerful, and I'm not going to say something to him because then he's going to do something to me. So I don't know. Very strange.
And I take it these people didn't have status, right?
Absolutely.
And they knew if they went to the authorities, I'm supposing this, I'm putting those thoughts out there, but we know the authorities really took care of the plantation owners. And you can imagine somebody who's a no-name comes up and goes, "Oh, I witnessed this go on at his dinner party." They're going to be like, "Get out of here." Now, unless you're bringing some evidence, unless you've got something compelling to tell us, we don't want to hear about it. And we're certainly not going to pursue it. So that's kind of how I see this, Brandy. I see this. I
agree.
And I can see this was not a one-off. I can see this was something on a fairly regular basis. Maybe they would have a party and wait for a traveler. Maybe a traveler would come by and he'd invite him in, and he'd send the word out to his accomplices and their wives and girlfriends, "Hey, come on over for an evening of entertainment tonight." And they all knew what it meant. They all knew it was going to end in murder.
Yeah, again, like the Hunger Games. They watch it unfold, and just wild. Okay, John, let's continue. We've got victim C, William Lickley, a farmer, murdered along with the accomplices of James Walker and Roger Maddox. So
there's the two accomplices. It's Walker and Maddox. And as a matter of fact, it was Maddox's wife that we know for sure was there at the dinner party and saw Cronin in the stocks and get strangled and be murdered. And we know it was Walker's girlfriends that were there too. So we kind of know this inner circle now. But this guy was simply a farmer. And this is kind of where Hutchinson has fallen a little bit out of control. I think he's devolving at this point. And why I say that is the Licky was known to him, because he was a farmer from the area. And we know that his next victim was known to him, and they had squabbles over land and property rights and cattle. So it kind of evolved from the anonymous stranger, traveler, right? So the
Uh-huh.
guy's traveling north and south in Jamaica. Nobody knows where he is. Nobody probably has any idea where he's going. So when he disappears, who's
Yeah,
filing a missing person? Nothing. So I
exactly.
really think that by the time we start talking about this victim, and let me point out, we're referring to him in letters, not numbers, because we have absolutely no idea where they fall along the timeline, but we
Yeah.
think that he is near the end, and we know victim D is at the very end. So the other ones are just somewhere in this 12-year timeline. But
Wow.
the other thing when we're profiling, we like to look at the victimology.
Uh-huh.
These are different races,
Yeah.
different social classes. Some are travelers, some are soldiers, some are merchants doing business on the island. But where he really starts to lose control is when it becomes neighbors and acquaintances like William Lickey. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what we know about that. We know for sure that Walker and Maddox participated in various killings, and we know that they assisted in murdering Lickey, and we know that they at the very least watched, if not participated, in the torture and murder of Cronin. So
Uh-huh.
we've got evidence of these two gentlemen helping Hutchinson to do what he wants to do.
Well, and you mentioned victim A, we got A, B, C, and you mentioned the next one is a neighbor, right? So this neighbor is shot after a property dispute, like you said, over a stray animal, maybe a cow that wandered onto Hutchinson's property and he refused to return it. But John, he just shoots him. It's just his neighbor.
Yeah, so we know that he had been in a number of disputes.
Okay.
I read many, many accounts where a cow, remember he had a cattle operation,
Yep.
would stray onto his property. Well, the law, pretty much everywhere, says
Uh-huh.
just because it comes onto your property doesn't mean it's your cow, right?
That's
You got to
right.
give
Right.
it back. Well, he would keep the cows and refuse to return them. So we know he had a history of doing that, and we think that's kind of what led to some of the disputes that he had, including with this neighbor and another plantation owner, a neighboring
Uh-huh.
plantation owner, Jonathan Hutton, who he attacked with a saber while he was out riding with his 8-year-old daughter, Mary. Now, Hutchinson miraculously survived with a severe head wound. It required a silver plate being put in his head. But that assault, so not the murder,
Uh,
that assault triggered this whole investigation into
uh,
Hutchinson, which we'll get into in a minute. But I mean, it goes back to what I said before. White on white crime was taken very seriously. Everybody else up to this point has been a stranger and disappeared, right? Nobody knows where
That's
they
right.
are. Nobody know. But when he attacks a neighboring plantation owner in front of his daughter and the plantation owner survives, that's where it all falls apart.
Okay, John. So let's get into a little bit of profiling. We talked about the different kind of victims, the different kind of ways of killing his victims. So, let's kind of talk about the MO, and what else are you unraveling as profiling goes?
Yeah, and we're piecing this together. Again, there's not a tremendous amount of information. In the end, we end up getting testimony from several people that were at the dinner parties, testimony from the slaves, testimony from the accomplices. So a little bit. We know that he built this castle specifically for killing. He used the loopholes in the defensive towers to shoot down at his victims. He used a rifle to kill the majority of them. but we also know that he strangled some, like Timothy Cronin. And we also, there are accounts that he beheaded some after the murder. He would watch them leave the entertainment area, the center of the castle, go along the hedgerows going out of the castle, and shoot him with a rifle from the tower. Sometimes he didn't even invite him in. Sometimes he would just see somebody traveling on the road and decide, well, I wonder if I can kill him, and shoot him from the tower and kill him. We know his motivation, this type of killing, because most of it is from such a long distance, is thrill, it's excitement. He found sadistic pleasure in killing people. We also discovered, though, we'll talk about this a little later, that he kept souvenirs. So, like I said, how can we go back and project some profiling things on these guys? Because they had the same tendencies, the same traits, the same characteristics as modern day serial killers. He didn't kill for money, we know, because several of the souvenirs he held on to. They had value, but he didn't need the money, obviously, and he held onto them as trophies. So we can certainly see that. Now, what would happen after he killed him? And I think this is
wow,
it's
John.
interesting.
Just wow.
Well, the way he used other people,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
The way he used other people, not only the people at the dinner party, but the enslaved peoples on his property. He would kill these individuals and then get the slaves to dismember the bodies during the night. They would hide the skulls, and this goes back to accounts that he decapitated people. All right. So this kind of verifies what we heard about him using a saber, and we know he's going to do a saber attack later on, but that he had a saber and decapitated people, because our best estimates 40 to 50 victims, but we found 20 skulls, and all of the skulls were in a nearby cotton tree. That's where he would put the skulls, a different place than body parts and the body. The slaves later corroborated this testimony, saying, yes, he would behead some of the victims. They would be forced to take their skulls and put them by the cottonwood tree, and then they would take the remaining parts of the victims and throw them down into that 300-foot sinkhole. But prior to doing that, Hutchinson collected souvenirs like watches and wallets and other things from his victims, and they would be found later on. So this was a whole murder ritual, Brandy.
It's like a functioning, it's like, okay, he's using slaves who usually help him with other things, right? That are cattle, if he was going to be selling any of that. But they're used because they need to keep things running on their property, right? That's what the slaves are used for. They're used to keep things running. This is almost just like a function of the castle. It's like a work function. It's like he's using, and then to have John, how bold it is to have these slaves dismember bodies, get rid of them, put the skulls in the cotton tree. Was he just not thinking he was ever going to be caught? Does he,
I think he thought he had so much power and control over the slaves, and we're going to get to it later. Wow. But during this time, under English common law, nothing that the slaves said could be used in court against the white plantation owner.
Oh my goodness.
Their testimony was not considered valid.
Wow.
He knew that.
Wow.
He knew that, and he used that to his advantage. So they were afraid to go against his will and against his wishes. But they also knew even if they went and told somebody, they wouldn't be believed, because part of English common law at the time was testimony from a slave is not valid. So to me, this is like it's like a house of horrors. I don't know how many, horror directors and producers ever studied Louis Hutchinson, but to me, this entire arrangement is horrific.
Yeah. Okay, so you've did a bunch of profiling. We talked about the victimology. We talked about the castle, the crime scenes, what they're doing after, post-murder, the dump sites. But he's going to be arrested eventually, John. So let's kind of talk about the aggravated assault, not murder, that leads to his arrest.
Yeah, and you got to remember, this occurred over a decade, right?
Yeah.
They think about 12 years, but again, if nobody knows who the traveler is, where they're going, nobody's looking for them, the victims literally disappear into this sinkhole. But as we said, we think towards the end here, he starts devolving. He attacks a neighbor. Okay. That is later tied to him, but that's a very bold move. It's not that anonymous victim. Then, apparently, like I said, Dr. Jonathan Hutton, who was a fellow plantation owner, and they had an ongoing dispute over land and I think over cattle. And Hutchinson, when he saw him out riding one day, attacked Hutton with a saber as Hutton's riding with his 8-year-old daughter, and hit him in the head, causing a severe head wound, so severe that he ended up having a plate put in his head. But even with the head wound, he traveled to Kingston, the capital, and lodged a formal complaint. But because the injury was so severe, and I can't even believe it. I don't even know. I mean, we hear about people having an injury and getting care flight, from a small town outside of Dallas to Dallas. That this guy got on a ship, went back to England, had the permanent plate put in, and recovered. So he was attacked in 1772. He reported the offense, but because he immediately left to seek treatment in England, apparently the authorities could not act upon what he reported.
Oh.
Because he wasn't there.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, gosh.
So Hutton is so mad about what happened to him, he returns to Jamaica a year later with the silver plate in his head.
Yeah.
With his whole intention on securing a warrant and arresting Hutchinson for what he did. So these crimes have been going on a year. Hutton's attacked, but it's now another whole year before he comes back to file the complaint, get the warrant, and try to get Hutchinson arrested.
Okay, so now we know a year goes by, and what do we know about serial killers, John? They don't stop. So in that year, there is a murder during that attempted arrest. His name is John Callender, an English soldier, and others that formed a militia to execute the arrest warrant on Hutchinson. So, John,
so basically think of this as a tactical team, or it's constables and military officers getting together who have a legal order, a arrest warrant from the court in Jamaica. So they say, we're going to go arrest Hutchinson for the crime that he committed against Dr. Hutton. Going back to that, we do not tolerate white on white crime. We do not tolerate plantation owner on plantation owner crime. That's why we set this up like this in the beginning of the show. So they immediately, when Hutton returned from England, got an arrest warrant, went out there with an arrest team, And
Uh-huh.
a member of the team, one of the English soldiers, John Callender, during the attempt to arrest Hutchinson, was shot and killed. Hutchinson
Mm.
killed him in front of everybody else. So now everybody sees Callender murdered right there in
Gosh.
front of them. They then say, all right, we're gonna, so they basically left the scene with Callender, one of
Uh-huh.
their fallen buddies, and gave up on arresting Hutchinson at that time, right? Because
Yeah.
now one of their members is shot, he may be dying, he did die, they're trying to get him treatment. Hutchinson flees, right?
Okay. Yep.
He wants to get out of there
Yeah.
because he knows they now have an arrest warrant for him. And now that there's this arrest warrant, now there's this attack on the English soldier, now that the soldier dies, it's like anything else. Everybody starts talking.
Yeah.
Everybody comes
Yeah.
forward. Oh, well, we thought there was something suspicious with that guy. We would see people go in and never come out. We would see
Ugh.
travelers disappear. So now you've got all this commotion, right?
Yep.
And they're now putting together a much larger arrest team, and they're going to go get him at Edinburgh Castle. But Hutchinson, knowing that this big arrest team, posse, if you would, is
Uh-huh.
coming after him, flees to Old Harbor Bay, where he's going to get a boat and get out of there. But not only did they have a militia on the land, they had notified the British Navy
Mm.
at the port. The Navy circled around to Old Harbor Bay, the closest spot to Hutchinson's property, and the sailors from Admiral George Bridges Rodney's Royal Navy captured him, and the account was fascinating. I actually read it. Hutchinson not only tried to flee on a boat, but then as the sailors were trying to arrest him, he jumped in the water, and they said that his shocking red hair stood out among the beautiful blue waters of Jamaica, and they pulled him out by his hair and arrested him. I invite everyone to follow True Crime and Wine on our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. You can find us at JJ, that's me, JJ True Crime and Wine, JJ True Crime and Wine on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Also, if you'd like to sign up for our monthly newsletter, you can shoot us an email at truecrime@casarowines.com. That's CASSARO wines.com. True Crime at CasarowWines.com. We'll add you to our newsletter. And of course, I've been booking events all over the country. Today I was on the phone with Georgia and South Carolina, Montana, Washington, Idaho even, just this morning. And so if you'd like to bring a True Crime and Wine to a winery or a wine bar near you, simply email us, truecrime@casarowines.com, and we'll hook up with that winery that you recommend and see if we can bring a live show right to you. truecrime@casarowines.com.
Good. He did not
What?
get away.
Why
I mean, I
haven't
think
we seen a movie about this,
I
Brandy?
know. I mean, I'm picturing in my head, I'm picturing all the other movies tied together that make me think of this case. And just the game and the people involved. And now you have people in the community up in arms, like, oh yeah, we did see some funny stuff maybe
Right.
kind of going on that nobody ever reported or said anything about this guy, right?
For
And
a
then
decade.
for a decade, and then he is going to escape on a boat, and then all of a sudden, they've got the Navy involved. They already know he's going to be traveling by boat. They catch him, and John, now they're going to go into the castle. Now they're going to start be looking for some evidence. They're going to find some watches. But John, I can only imagine that the evidence is probably substantial in this building.
Well, and this really is an open close case, right? They're not even worrying about the attack on Dr. Hutton anymore, right? They saw one of their own soldiers killed in front of them. There is no question. Hutchinson murdered him. He shot him right in front of not just witnesses, other soldiers, other militia. So they're 100%. This guy's done. He's over with. We're going to search his castle. What they find is 43 watches. Where did he get the watches from, Brandy?
Oh, and 43 of them, John.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and doesn't mean he took a watch from every victim. So that just goes to show me, John, are there at least 43 victims?
At least, but probably more.
Right?
I don't know anybody that wears 2 watches.
No.
But I know a lot of people like me that don't wear one. So what about the people that didn't wear a watch? We know there's 43 bodies out there.
Yeah.
And then a whole lot more. They also found large quantities of clothing that suggested that he stripped his victims and kept it like souvenirs. Again, he wasn't trying to get rid of it. He could have thrown it into the sinkhole. He didn't try to sell it. He didn't need the money. So they found that. At the cottonwood tree, they found 20 human skulls. At the cottonwood tree. And then they went to the sinkhole and they did recover some human bones, but more important, he, after killing Calendar, apparently was thrown into the sinkhole, and they identified him by the clothing. So now we're getting this picture. This kind of ragtag posse shows up. We don't know how many of them were armed. We don't know what equipment they had or anything. They've got an arrest warrant saying you assaulted Hutton. We're going to bring you in. He shoots and kills Calendar. They flee to go get the authorities. So now we got the Army getting together with another warrant to come get him. We got the Navy getting together. He throws Calendar's body into the sinkhole where he's been throwing others. And authorities start talking to the slaves. And even though they can't use their testimony in trial, the slaves start saying, yeah, we helped dismember them. We helped strip them. Yeah, we took the bodies. We threw them in the sinkholes. Yes, we took the skulls. We put them by the cottonwood tree. And it pulled everything together in a nice, neat little package.
John, were they able to link him? I mean, so did they, I know they find the watches, right? I know they find the watches. I know they find the clothing. I know they have all of this evidence, but did they find other body parts besides the skulls? Were they able to get things out of the sinkhole? I mean, I know you said they got some things, but what are they going to try to tie him to when it comes to the trial? Well,
they really didn't want to tie him to anything. They really didn't care about it, right?
Okay.
So they had him cold on Calendar's murder. Right.
Yep,
They've got witnesses. He shot him. He killed him. They don't need the slave's testimony. They don't need anybody else's testimony. They've got him on that murder. But the shame of it is because they got him and we're going to sentence him to death. They really didn't look into a whole lot. Now, people that came forward that said, we had a teacher, Timothy Cronin, and he disappeared, right? Yeah. Or the slave that says, yeah, I don't know the guy's name, but he was sick and we helped him to recover and then he recovered and we shot him. So that's where the victim's ABCD came from that we presented earlier is some people did come forward and say, we think somebody we knew or one of our loved ones was a victim of this guy. But from the criminal justice standpoint, it's not dissimilar to convicting somebody of murder, sentencing them to life without parole or death, and closing other cases that you think were linked to him, but you may not have the DNA or genetic evidence or whatever. And obviously in 1770, they didn't have any of that. So they did not really press any other formal charges except for the murder of Callender. But obviously he's linked to all these other bodies.
Now, John, he pleads not guilty and was represented by several lawyers, but was found guilty of murder because of the number of witnesses that talked about the crime, to the crime of shooting Callender. So again, like he's on trial for the murder of Callender, but
and I kind of
not guilty.
I kind of added that information in there because I honestly think if he hadn't just boldly killed Callender in front of people, the attorneys he hired, he might have got off. But there were members of the militia that said, we were here to arrest him. We had a legal warrant. He knew we had a warrant. He knew we were going to arrest him. He shot and killed him in cold blood. So it was kind of a open and shut case. He was sentenced to death by hanging for the murder of John Callender, and they hung him really quickly on March 16th, 1773. He was 40 years old. In his last hours, he wrote a defiant epitaph about he was still had power and control over other people, and he paid £100 to have it engraved on his tombstone, and they did engrave it and buried him in a local cemetery. But of course, the castle, now having no owner, no manager, nothing, fell into ruins.
So, but now it is still standing, John, as a historical site.
The site is there. Yeah, you can. Okay. I've actually seen pictures of the site. The towers are basically gone. The building is basically gone. You've got walls. It really is ruined. But now that they've got Hutchinson and they kill him, but he had those two accomplices. Remember?
Yes.
Walker, and Maddox.
Yep.
So they bring them in as accomplices, and Maddox actively participated along with Hutchinson and Walker in some of these murders. Maddox's wife and two other women, Susanna Cole and Elizabeth Thomas, all witnessed the crimes, and they were all implicated, meaning they were all going to go down for murder. But Maddox and Cole provided testimony. They weren't charged. And then Cole actually was charged with another crime and found not guilty. But the women turned on the men, and the men were found guilty of murder, both of them, and sentenced to death and hung, just like Hutchinson. So that dinner party of people that watched Cronin's death, that we know, that we assume probably watched other deaths, other kidnappings, other murders, it ended up that Hutchinson and his two accomplices got what they deserved for the murders they did, and the wives, the girlfriends, the other witnesses ended up providing the testimony that was needed, along with the accounts given by the slaves of what happened. We know that in 1770, Lewis Hutchinson was not only a horrific murderer, but he was a brutal serial killer that was responsible for 40 to 50 deaths in Jamaica. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of our True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners you can follow us on our socials, JJ True Crime and Wine, and you can email us if you've got a winery where you'd like to bring the live show to. Email us at truecrime@casaro Wines, True Crime at Casaro, Cassaro, wines, plural.com. And just let us know. Hey, John, I'm in Boise or Poughkeepsie or Tampa or wherever you are. And we'd love to have the True Crime show out here. And I have a great winery in mind. That's what I was doing most of the day today, is booking True Crime and Wine shows, the live event, in about a dozen states just this morning. So I could just give you a hit. We will be in California, Idaho, Montana, Washington, Florida, Virginia, Carolinas, and just booked Georgia. And we'll keep you up to date. You can see all of those dates on our website, truecrimeandwine.com. But I think that wraps up the business for today. And I want to thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey. And of course, our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for helping make this show possible. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Lauren. And I invite you to join us for our next episode, where this unique serial killer confessed to murdering 21 young boys across several Midwestern states. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us today on True Crime and Wine. Salute.